Agatha. Welcome in. Take a moment and just arrive. Wherever you are right now, however you're lying, let this be the place you stop. You don't have to do anything else tonight. There's nowhere else to be. Whatever you've been carrying today, the weight of it, the noise of it, you can set it down now. None of it needs to follow you into the dark. And whatever you didn't finish today, it will still be there in the morning. You don't need to hold it any longer. So let's begin to slow everything down together. Let your mouth close, soft, and breathe in through your nose, gently, and let it go, slow, like a sigh. There's no rhythm to chase. Just let the breath out take a little longer than the breath in. Breathe in and let it fall away. And again, in and out. Slower still. Now one deeper one. Take in a breath and then just a little more on top. And now let it all go. Good. Let the next breath find its own way now. It knows what to do. And as the breathing settles, let your body begin to follow. Let your jaw unclench. Let your teeth come apart, just slightly. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Let them be heavy. Let your hands open or just rest, however they fall. Let your belly soften with every breath out, nothing held in. Let your legs grow heavy, heavier than they've been all day. And your feet, let them be still and warm. And right here, in the center of your chest, let there be a little warmth, a loosening, as though something you'd been bracing against is finally letting go. You're not waiting for anything now. You're just here, in the low light, at the edge of sleep. Tonight we have a story from Agatha, a story she has held for a very long time. There are things that happen in a life, things witnessed, things survived, things that never quite let go, that can't be spoken of easily, not with the people who knew the people involved. But some stories need a witness. Some things need to be said before it's too late to say them. And it's easier, sometimes, to give a story to a stranger in the dark than to anyone she has ever known or loved. Because you won't look at her differently in the morning. Because the dark makes certain truths easier to speak out loud. This is one of those stories. It's filled with things that don't fully explain themselves, with questions that were never answered and silences that were never broken. Some of it will stay with you. That is the nature of these things. But tonight, it finally gets told.
This is Sorrel Branch.
Before we sleep. There is a kind of room you have sat in. You know the one. It has chairs along the wall that do not quite face each other, so that everyone in it can look at everyone else without ever having to. It has a clock that is a little fast or a little slow, and a light overhead that hums under the quiet, and a smell to it that is not quite any one thing. Floor cleaner and paper, and the particular staleness of a place where people wait for news they did not choose to come and get. I have sat in 100 of those rooms in my life, the way we all do once we get to a certain age, and they are all the same room, and I could not tell you now which one this was or what town it was in. What I can tell you is that I was sitting in it, the way you sit in those places, folded into yourself, somewhere between patience and dread, when I noticed that a woman across the room kept looking at me. She was about my age, that is to say, she was old, and she was doing what people do when they are trying to decide whether they know you, looking, and then looking away, and then looking back a beat too long, working at it. I did not pay her much mind at first. When you are old, you are looked at less in general, and looked at strangely more in particular, and you learn to let it pass over you. But she got up, she crossed that little room which took her some doing, and she stood in front of me, and she reached down and took my hand in both of hers, not to shake it, just to hold it, and she said my name. She said it the way it was said when I was a child. There is a difference, you understand. A name has ages to it, the way a tree has rings, and the oldest ring is the one only a few people ever touched. The people who knew you before you were anybody, when you were just a small thing in a yard somewhere. She said my name with the child still in it, and the moment she did, I knew her, though it took me a moment to take a whole lifetime off her face and find the girl underneath. She had lived next door to me. For the year and some that I lived anywhere near anyone, when we were both 8 years old, going on 9, she had been the whole of my world, the way the one other child your age becomes the whole of your world in a small place. And here she was, holding my hand in a waiting room at the far end of both our lives. She did not ask how I had been. She did not say any of the things people say. She held on to my hand, and she looked at me with an expression I have thought about ever since, because it was not quite hope, and it was not quite fear, but it was made of both. And what she said was, "Did you ever hear what happened to our town?" I told her no. And she told me what she knew, which was not much. And we sat together a little while in that humming room, and then a voice called out one of our names, and we said the things you say, and we parted. I never saw her again. I do not know if she is living. But I have carried her question every single day from that one to this, and I have decided finally that the only thing to be done with a question you cannot answer is to hand it to someone else and let them carry it a while. So that is what I will do tonight. I am going to give you everything I have from around the edges of it, and there is a great deal. And then I am going to leave you the way she left me, with the hole in the middle where the answer ought to be. You should know that going in. There is no bottom to this one. I have only ever had the edges. I had better tell you who I was, so you will understand how I came to be a child in that town at all, and why I was the kind of child who could leave it. We did not stay anywhere when I was young. My father followed work, and the work he followed was the kind that used a man up in one place and then was finished with him and waited for him somewhere else. So we went where it went. I could not give you a count of the towns. They run together now into one long ribbon of arrivals and leavings. A rented house, a new school with its rules already made, a winter, a spring, and then the boxes again. I grew up in the backs of trucks and the fronts of buses, with my whole life in a crate I could put my arms around. A child raised that way learns something early, and what she learns is not to set down anything she cannot pick back up and carry. You do not get attached to a room, because the room is not yours and will not be yours by summer. You do not learn the long way around the streets, because you will not be walking them long enough to need the shortcuts. And you do not, most of all, give your heart to another child, because that child is a thing too big to fit in the crate, and you will have to leave her behind, and it will tear when it goes. It was a hard way to raise a person, this, and I would not wish it on a child of mine. It makes you watchful. It makes you stand a little apart, even in the middle of a thing, with one eye always on the door. There is a loneliness to it that I did not have a name for until I was grown, and by then I had lived in it so long, it had stopped feeling like loneliness and started feeling simply like the shape of the world. But I will tell you the other thing it does, because it matters to this story more than anything else I could say about myself. It saves you. Now and again, very rarely, the not belonging that costs you everywhere else turns out in one particular place to be the only thing that gets you out alive. I did not know that as a child. You almost never know the thing that is saving you while it is doing it. You find out long after, if you find out at all. And the finding out is its own kind of weight. Most of those towns I could not tell apart now if you laid them out side by side in front of me. They have gone soft and run together, the way a stack of photographs runs together if you keep them too long in a damp drawer. A porch here, a schoolyard there, a particular tree I climbed in a particular yard, whose town I could not name to save my life. And that is the ordinary way of it. That is what a town is supposed to do to a child. There was a place we lived before this one, a flat, dull town out on good farming ground where nothing ever happened, and the worst thing in it was a bad-tempered rooster. And I remember it the way you remember a wall you once stood and looked at, without feeling, without edges, a gray nothing that did me neither harm nor good, and passed through me and ran on. A child lives in a dozen walls like that, and is the better for it. The walls are supposed to pass through you. I am telling you about this one town, out of all of them, because it is the one that did not pass through. It is the one that stayed in me like a stone a person swallows, and I have felt the weight of it in the exact place where all the others left nothing at all, every day of a very long life. The town itself I could not point to on a map. I have tried. I have sat with maps of 3 or 4 states and run my finger up the little hollows and along the little branches, and nothing has ever risen up and said, "Here, this is the one." We were only there the once, for a year and a season, and I was a child. And children do not learn the names of counties. They learn the shape of a place, the way to the creek, the loose board on the porch, the dog 2 houses down that you cross the road to avoid, and they let the names belong to the grown people. So I have the shape of it and almost none of the name, and I have come to think that is right somehow, that the name is one more thing that got taken. It sat in a fold of the mountains, the way those towns do, down in a crease of the land where a creek had cut a flat just wide enough for people to live on. There was one road in. It was also the one road out, and hold on to that because it comes back. One road, down off the ridge and into the fold, past the few outlying places and into what passed for the middle of it: a store with a porch, a church with a short steeple, a school with 2 rooms and 1 stove, and the houses scattered up the slopes on either side wherever the ground would hold them. And at the bottom of the fold, where the houses gave out, the creek ran down out of a stand of woods that went up a branch into the high country and did not stop. I will come to those woods. I am putting them off the way the town put them off, which was the only way anyone there knew how to live, by leaving the woods to the last of everything, by arranging the whole day so that you did not have to look up the branch if you did not want to. But they were there. They were always there, at the bottom of the fold, at the edge of the eye. Let me give you the town in its daylight first, though, before I take you down to the bottom of it, because the daylight was real too, and a child lived in it, and it was not all dread. There were good things, and I would be lying to you if I left them out. And worse than lying, I would be making the place into something simpler than it was. The store had a cooler by the door with bottled drinks set down in the cold water, and on a hot day the man would let us reach into the elbow and fish around for the flavor we wanted, and the water was so cold it made the bones of your hand ache. And that ache is one of the plainly happy things I still have out of that whole year. There was the church of a Sunday, the 1 bell and the short steeple, and in the warm months they left the windows open, and the singing came out and went up both slopes, thin and high and never quite together. And I have heard finer music since, and not much I would rather hear again. There were suppers. There were the long blue evenings, and the lightning bugs coming up out of the grass on the slopes the way they do, rising in their slow hundreds, and the grown folks out on the porches passing talk back and forth across the dark from one porch to the next, in the easy way of people who have nothing in particular to say, and the whole night to say it in. So it was a town. Keep that in your mind, because it is true, and because it makes the rest worse. It was a real town with real life in it, and to a child, most days, it was simply home. It was only that underneath the life, holding the life up, there was something else, the held quality, the careful arrangement, and a child felt it the way you feel a floor through a rug. You walk on the rug, you play on the rug, but the soles of your feet know the whole time that there is a hard floor under it, and exactly how far down it is. I remember that the town did not feel right. I have to be careful saying that, and I am going to be careful only this once, and then trust you to remember it for the rest. I am an old woman telling you about being a small girl, and the danger in that is enormous. It is the easiest thing in the world to take what I know now and lay it back over what I felt then, and to dress up a child's plain unease in the clothes of a grown woman's understanding, and to call the whole costume a memory. I am trying not to do that. So when I tell you a thing I felt as a child, I will try to give it to you the size it was then, no bigger. And the size it was then is this: the town felt like a held breath. That is the closest I have ever come. There was a heaviness in the air of it, a stillness underneath the ordinary noise, a sense, and I felt this as plainly at 8 as I would feel a change in the weather, that the daylight in that town was a thing the people made, on purpose, with effort, the way you make a smile when you are frightened and do not want the other person to see. The light did not fall on that town. The town held the light up. I want to tell you that this was only my own strangeness, the watchfulness of a child who had been moved too many times and saw shadows everywhere. But it was not only mine. I knew it was not, even then, because of the grown people. Children read grown people the way sailors read water. It is a matter of survival, and we are very good at it. And I could read, in every grown person in that town, the same careful arrangement. the way they kept their talk to the middle of things and never let it drift toward the edges, the way a certain silence would come down over a supper table if the conversation wandered too far up the branch, the way they would change a subject so smoothly that you would not have noticed the change if you had not noticed, the way I always noticed the small flinch that came just before it. They were all of them holding their breath, the whole town, and they had been holding it so long that they had forgotten they were doing it, as you forget the sound of a thing that never stops. There was one other child my age in the houses near ours, a girl, and her name I am going to give you as Ruth, because Ruth is near enough to what it was, and because I do not think I have the right, after all this time, to set down the true one. She lived in the next house up the slope, close enough that I could see her window from mine, and from the first week we were thrown together the way the only two children of an age are always thrown together in a place with no others, by simple arithmetic, and then, quickly, by something better than arithmetic. We were inseparable. I have had, in a long life, perhaps 4 friendships that went all the way to the bone, and that one with Ruth was the first, and the fact that it lasted only a year and some has never made it smaller. If anything, it kept it pure. We never had the time to disappoint each other. We never grew the calluses that the long friendships grow. There was only the bright, clean middle of it, a year of 2 girls with the run of a small place, and then it was cut off clean. And so it has stayed bright in me all my life, like a photograph that never got handled enough to fade. I could tell you a great deal about that year, and most of it would be nothing, which is to say, it would be everything, because that is what childhood is, a great heap of nothing that turns out to have been everything. We made a house under the back porch of her place, in the cool dark where the dirt stayed dry, and we kept things there. A tin, some bottle glass worn smooth by the creek, a doll with one eye that we shared and quarreled over and loved. We knew which boards of which porches were loose. We knew the dog 2 houses down, and we knew the old man who fed the dog, and we knew the storekeeper would sometimes give us the broken end of a stick of candy if there was no one watching to make him stop. We walked to the school together, and we walked home together, and in the long light of the summer evenings, we sat on the slope between our houses and did the great work of childhood, which is to say, we talked about nothing for hours and were perfectly, wholly content. She was braver than I was. I should say that, because it is part of why I am the one telling this, and not, in some other version of the world, the one who never came up out of that hollow. Ruth would go first, over a fence, down a bank, into the dark crawl space under a porch, and I would go second, after her, on the strength she lent me by going. It was Ruth who learned the dog 2 houses down by walking straight up to it on the first day while I hung back at the road, and after that the dog was ours. And it was Ruth who took us once, the furthest down toward the foot of it that either of us ever went together, on an ordinary bright afternoon, daring each other a step and a step and a step, until we both felt the cold come up at the same moment, and both stopped at the same moment, without either of us saying stop. We turned and we walked back up, not running, because running would have been admitting something, and we did not speak of it, and we did not go that far down again. I have wondered since whether it was the same nerve that took her down toward the cold as a girl that drove her as a grown woman to spend years trying to learn the end of the story, and whether it was my own holding back, my second-place caution, that let me put the whole thing down for a lifetime and walk away from it. If so, then we were, the two of us, exactly suited to be the two who lived. The one brave enough to go and look, the one careful enough to leave. And you should understand, because it matters at the end, that I loved her. Children do not have a smaller word for it, and they should not be made to use one. I loved Ruth the way you can only love the person who is, for one whole year of your life, the entire population of your heart. And then I was taken away from her, and I did not see her again until she crossed that waiting room, old, to ask me a question I could not answer. The woods at the head of the branch were not like the woods around the other places we lived. I had been in plenty of woods. A child who has moved as often as I was finds the woods quickly in every new place, because the woods are the one thing that is the same everywhere, the one country a child can emigrate to, no matter what state the grown folks have dragged her into. I knew woods. I was not afraid of woods. And these were not woods in the way I understood the word. They were older, for one thing. Not old the way a forest is old, with the big trees standing far apart and the floor swept clean, but old the way a place gets to be old that has been let alone too long, crowded and dark and tangled down low with laurel so thick that past a certain point you could not have walked into them if you had wanted to. The branch came down out of them cold. I mean that plainly. The water that came down that branch was colder than the water anywhere else, and the air that came with it was colder. And on a hot, still day in the middle of summer, you could walk down toward the creek and feel the cold reaching out from the tree line and pooling in the low ground like something poured. The other children felt it too. We used to dare each other down toward it and then lose our nerve, all of us, at about the same place, where the cold began. And there was a family that lived up in there. Up at the head of the branch, past the cold, past where the last house of the town stood, up where the road gave out into a track, and the track gave out into the laurel, there were people. I never saw them. Let me be clear about that, because it would make a better story if I told you I had. And I have spent my life refusing to make this a better story than it was. No child saw them up close. They were a thing you knew as you know the far side of the moon. You knew it was there. You knew it turned. You would never lay eyes on it. What you knew of them, you knew from what they left in the woods. The children called them the windings. I do not know where the word came from. Some older child, some year. And then it was simply the word, passed from child to child, the way the important words are, with no one ever deciding. The family's own word for the work, the word the grown people used on the rare occasions they used any word at all, was the tying. And what the family tied, what they set out along the mouth of those woods, and back up into them farther than anyone had ever followed and returned to tell of, was a thing I have never been able to make a single soul rightly picture. Because it was not the thing you are picturing now. Put it out of your head, the little man made of sticks. That is the easy thing to imagine, and it is wrong. And the real thing was worse than any stick man for being so much harder to account for. What they tied were spindles, bundles wound tight of stripped switches and twine, and what I was told was hair, turned round and round always the same way, against the way the sun goes, into shapes that were no shape at all, not a man, not a beast, not anything a living person would think to make, just dense, patient, wound forms that you knew, looking at them, answered to a plan. You could feel the plan in them the way you feel a word on the tip of your tongue and that you could not read. And here is the thing the children whispered and turned out to have right. The family wound things into them, small things, ordinary things, out of houses, a bone button, the bowl of a spoon worn thin as paper, a door key, a fish hook, a child's tooth once. I did not see that one, I was told it, and I have never doubted it for a day since. Bound into the windings facing outward, so that the bundles were studded all over with the small, hard leavings of other people's days. And you understood, the few times you came near enough to see, that these were the things the family took, and that the taking and the binding in were some part of whatever the winding was for. And they were old. That is what has stayed with me longest. The windings were never taken down, only added to. The newest stood out at the front, bright twined, and you could still tell one switch from the next in them. But behind those, deeper toward the woods, the older ones rose up, big as a butter churn, big as a rain barrel, layered round and round across more years than anyone in that town had a bottom to. The outer windings still sound, and the inner gone soft and dark, and finally to powder, the way the heart goes out of an old tree. So the line of them read like rings. The farther up the branch you let your eye travel, the older and the larger and the more rotten at the core they grew, marking back and back through a reach of time the town had long since given up being able to measure. And between the windings, set at even paces along the exact seam where the laurel gave way to the old trees, were the stones. Stacked, not piled, you understand, stacked with care, where no one had any earthly reason to set a stone, balanced past what balance should allow, and each small stack finished off with a single pale river stone on the top of it, smooth, the wrong rock for that mountain entirely, carried up from some water miles away and set there like the dot above a letter. And hanging from the low limbs over all of it, spaced along the same seam, at about the height of a grown man's chest, were the gray things. I have never settled in all the years since what the gray things were. Wound finer than the rest, and weighted at the foot with something, a stone I always thought sewn up inside, so that they hung dead plumb and swung true on their cords. Cloth gone gray and stiff with weather, perhaps, or bark worked soft, or something rendered down until it might have been either. And strung through some of them, where the winding left a gap to show it, were small hard things, a chip of bone, a button of shell, a sliver of window glass, a tooth, so that the gray things were not only made to hang and to turn, they were made to sound. They hung one to a limb, spaced along the tree line, and the one thing every child agreed on, the one thing that has never left me, is that they turned, and that when they turned, faint, on the stillest nights, when the whole hollow had gone to its beds and the windows were black, you could hear them. A dry, soft clicking from the mouth of the woods, like slow rain on dead leaves, like teeth idly tapped, that the grown ones heard too and called the creek, or the bugs, or nothing at all. They turned. On a still day, on a day with no wind anywhere. And you will say, a child cannot judge whether there is wind. But I am telling you that a child in those mountains can judge wind better than a weatherman, because a child is out in it all day with nothing else to attend to. On a day when not a leaf was moving anywhere in that crease, the gray things at the edge of the woods would turn, slowly, first one way and then back, the way a thing turns that is hung on a cord and has just been touched. That was the family at the head of Sorrel Branch. Sorrel Branch. There. I have given you the name of the water, which is the one name I have kept, because it is the only name in all of this that I am sure of. And I am sure of it because it is the name that everyone in the town said the least. You can settle in if you have not. There is no hurry in any of this. There never was. The whole of the telling is meant to be slow, the way the thing itself was slow. A year in the living and a lifetime in the carrying. Let your eyes close if they want to. I will still be here. I have told you what the grown people did about the family, which was to do nothing and to say nothing, and to arrange their whole days around the nothing until it was as solid and as silent as a wall. The children did the opposite. The children never stopped talking about the people up the branch, because that is what children do with the thing the grown people will not name. They rush into the silence and fill it with everything they have, and what a child has is imagination and dares, and the peculiar mixture of cruelty and tenderness that children keep only for one another. So we had our stories. Every child in that town carried a whole freight of them about the family up the branch, and the stories did not agree, and we believed all of them at once, which is a thing you can only do at 8. They were not really people, some children said. They had been up there too long to be people, longer than the town, longer than anyone's grandfather's grandfather, and a person does not last like that. They came down at night, said others, and you must never look out your window after dark, because if you did, you might see one of them standing at the bottom of your slope, looking up, counting the houses. They could not cross running water. That one I remember being handed to me with enormous authority by a boy who had it, he swore, straight from his uncle. They made the windings out of the things they took, and what it was they took was never quite said, but every child knew to drop the voice to nothing at that part and let the not saying do the work. And the gray things. The gray things that hung at the height of a man's chest and turned to no wind. The gray things were the worst of it, in the children's telling. And here is the part I have never been able to leave alone. The children all agreed, without a one of us ever having said it out loud and put it to a vote, that the gray things were not put there to keep us out. We agreed they were not decorations, and we agreed they were not scarecrows set to frighten the town's children off the woods. We believed, all of us, the same belief arrived at separately in the dark of all our separate bedrooms, that the gray things were warnings pointed the other way, that they faced up the branch, into the woods, away from the town, as though the family were not fencing the town out of the woods at all, as though they were fencing something in. It was children's nonsense, plainly. It was the exact kind of thing children build in the dark to frighten one another with, and then cannot pull back down when they are alone and the lamp is out. I knew it was nonsense, even as I helped to build it. But I have thought, across all the years since, about how the nonsense of frightened children sat so much nearer to the truth of that place than all the careful silence of the grown people who actually knew. The grown people who had the reasons took the reasons and built them into a wall and stood with their backs to it. The children who had nothing, no reasons at all, said every wild thing that came into their heads, and stumbled in all that wild saying right up against the true shape of the thing. The gray things were facing up the branch. I cannot tell you how a pack of children knew which way a thing faced when no child had ever stood close enough to see it. But we knew, and we were not wrong. The rule came to me and to Ruth the way the oldest and most important rules always come to children, which is without the reason attached. You do not go in those woods. You do not go up the branch. You do not bother that family. And you do not so much as touch the things they hang. There is something bad in those woods." That was the whole of it. We were given it many times by many mouths, but the mouth I remember is Ruth's grandmother, because she lived in the house with Ruth and her people, and so she was the grown person nearest to the two of us through that whole year, and because she was the one who gave us the rule most often, and gave it most plainly, and because of a thing she did that I will come to. She was very old. She had the look of the very old that I have since grown into myself, where the face has gone past being any particular age and become simply a face that has been here a long time and seen the seasons go around more times than it cares to count. She kept to a chair on the porch in the warm months, with a quilt over her knees even in the heat, and she watched. That is what I remember most about her. She watched. Not us particularly. She watched the bottom of the fold. She sat in that chair turned a little, so that her eyes fell naturally down the slope toward where the creek came out of the cold, and she kept them there all day, the way a person keeps an eye on a pot that might boil over, or a child that might wander, or a sky that might turn. And she gave us the rule: easy, never sharp. I think that is the part that worked its way deepest into me, that she never once said it like a frightened person. She said it the way you would tell a child not to touch the stove, with a kind of settled certainty, a thing so long known that there was no heat left in the knowing. You do not go up the branch. And then she would go back to her watching. She gave us the fence over and over, and she never once gave us the reason, and it never once occurred to me to ask, because that is not how a child receives the oldest rules. A child does not ask the reason for the stove. The child simply learns the world has a stove in it, and the stove is hot, and that is all. I broke the rule once, only once, and it is the only time in that whole year that I was truly bodily afraid, and it is the reason I have believed every word of the rest of this for as long as I have lived. It was a summer evening, late, the long light going gold and then gray. Ruth had been called in. I was alone on the slope, and I had drifted. That is the only word, drifted, because there was no decision in it, no dare, no plan. I had drifted down toward the foot of the slope the way water drifts downhill, not meaning anything by it, just going where the ground sloped. And I came to the cold. I felt it come up around my ankles first, that poured cold, and I remember being mildly surprised, the way you are surprised to step from sun into shade, and not yet afraid. I looked up. I was closer to the tree line than I had ever been, and one of the gray things was right there, not 20 feet from me, hanging at the height of a man's chest from the lowest limb of the first big tree, and as I watched, it turned. There was no wind. The cold sat dead still around my legs, and the gray thing turned, slow, toward me, and then away, and then back, the way a thing turns when something has just touched it, or when something is just about to. And then there was a hand on my shoulder. I had not heard her come. Understand that she was a very old woman who could barely cross her own porch, and she had come down that slope over the rough ground in the falling dark without a sound, and the first I knew of her was her hand closing on my shoulder. I did not cry out. I think I was too far into the cold to cry out. She turned me, not roughly, but with a strength that had no give in it at all, a strength that was settling something, not asking about it. She turned me by the shoulder away from the tree line, and she walked me back up the slope toward the houses, her hand never leaving me. And she did not say one single word the whole way. And it was the not saying that frightened me. I have been scolded in my life, and scolding is a comfort. Scolding means the thing is small enough to be scolded. She did not scold me. She walked me out of the cold and back into the warm dark of the upper slope, and only when we were well up, well away, did she stop and crouch down in front of me with her old knees cracking and look me in the face. And what she said was not a scolding. She said very quietly, "You do not go down there in the evening." And then she looked at me a moment longer, and something moved across her face that I did not understand then, and have spent a lifetime understanding since. And she added, lower still, almost to herself, "It is worst in the evening." That is all she said. She walked me to my own door, and she waited until I was inside it, and then she went back to her own house in the dark, an old woman alone on that slope with the cold at the bottom of it. And I have never in my life felt so cared for and so frightened by the same person in the same moment. I watched her differently after that. I had taken her, before, for what a child takes any old woman to be, a fixture, a piece of the porch, kind in the vague way the old are kind, to be minded and otherwise not thought about. After the evening at the tree line, I understood that she was doing something. The watching was not the idle watching of the old. She was on a watch, the way a man on a ship is on a watch, and she had been on it longer than I had been alive, and she would be on it until she could not be, and there was no one coming to relieve her of it that I ever saw. I would look up at her on her porch after that, turned in her chair toward the low end of the fold with the quilt over her knees in the heat, and I would feel a thing I had no word for at 8 and have the word for now. It was the feeling you have toward a person who is standing between you and something, with their back to you, so that all you ever see of them is that they are facing the wrong way for comfort and will not turn around. I did not know what she was facing. I knew only that she had set herself between it and the rest of us, and that she did it every day, and that no one thanked her for it, because to thank her would have meant saying out loud the one thing the entire town had agreed never to say. It was nothing. That is what I have had to make my peace with. There was no sign, no warning, no last terrible night. There was simply a morning when my father said the work here was done, and the work was somewhere else now, and the boxes came down from wherever the boxes lived between towns, and we packed, the way we always packed, our whole life back into the crate I could put my arms around, and we drove up the one road up out of the fold and over the ridge, and the town went down behind us and was gone. I remember being glad. That is the part that has sat on me hardest across all these years. I was glad to leave, and a child is not glad to leave the one place she has a friend, the one place she has a doll with one eye under a porch and a whole bright country of her own. A child should grieve to leave that, and I had grieved every other leaving in my life, and this one I did not grieve. I was glad. There was a loosening in my chest as we came up over the ridge, a thing letting go that I had not known was held, and I did not understand it, and I did not question it, because a child does not question a gladness any more than she questions a stove. I know now. The body knows things long before the mind is allowed to be told them. And my body had spent a year in a town that was holding its breath. And it knew, coming up over that ridge, that it could breathe. So it breathed. And I called the breathing gladness, because gladness was the only word a child of 8 had for it. I did not say a proper goodbye to Ruth. We were children. We did not believe in last times. We thought we would go on under that porch forever. I have a memory of her on the slope as we pulled away, but I have handled that memory so many times that I no longer trust it, and I will not pretend to you that it is real. What is real is that I left her there, in that hollow, at the edge of that cold, and I went up over the ridge and out into the long ribbon of other towns, and I did not see her or think of her, not really, not allowing myself, for the rest of the life that came after. Her family got out too. I know that now because she was there in the waiting room to tell me, an old woman who had lived a long life somewhere far from there. 2 families that did not belong. 2 families that came and went. 2 girls who got out of that hollow and grew old in the wide world and met again at the end of it. I will come back to what that means, the getting out, because it is the hardest part, and I have saved it for last on purpose. But first, I have to give you what Ruth gave me in the few minutes we had, because it is the middle of the story, and I have been keeping you from it the way she kept me from it, by talking about everything around it first. She held my hand in both of hers, and I asked her, finally, to tell me, what happened to our town? And she told me, and I am going to give it to you, exactly as small and as broken as she gave it to me, because to make it whole would be to lie, and the brokenness of it is the truest thing in this whole telling. The family at the head of the branch had died out. That much she was sure of, though she did not know who the last of them was, or how that last one went, or in what year. And here is a part of it that has stayed with me, that she had tried to find out over a long life and could not. There simply was no record of it. People as old as the hills, who had been there since before anyone, and when the last of them died, there was no name written down, no stone, no notice, nothing. They went out of the world the way they had lived in it, unrecorded, up at the head of the branch, and the first the town knew of it was the only way the town could have known. The tying stopped. That was how you knew. One spring, the gray things were not renewed. The old ones hung on through that summer and into the fall, weathering, clicking faintly on the still nights to no one who would answer, and no new ones went up. The windings began to come apart in the rains, and the stones, Ruth said this, and I have never been able to put it down, the stacked stones came unstacked, not fell, came unstacked, found in the mornings lying scattered wide, as though a hand had swept through them in the night. And the pale capstones, the smooth, wrong-colored ones, carried up from far-off water, were never anywhere among the scattered rock at all. Those were simply gone, every one, and there was no one left up there to have taken them. And then, she said, nothing was wrong for a while. I need you to sit with that the way I have had to. Nothing was wrong for a while. A year, she thought, maybe more. The town let its breath out. People who had kept their whole lives arranged around not looking up the branch began, a little, to look. The cold off the woods was still there, but the cold had always been there, and a thing that is always there stops being a warning and starts being just the weather. A calf went bad. A dog would not go down toward the creek, and then a second dog would not. But dogs are dogs. There was a smell, some evenings, that the families nearest the bottom noticed, and did not speak of to one another for far longer than you would think people could keep such a thing to themselves. And then it came down out of the woods. She could not tell me what it was. She had spent years and could not, and neither can I. And I have come to believe that the not being able is not a failure of the telling, but the very heart of the thing. Because what came down out of those woods was not a thing that submits to being told. What she had were the same few fragments, worn smooth by all the times she had turned them over, and they were these: that there were fires. That came up, she said, again and again, from everyone she ever managed to ask. Fires that no one could lay to a cause. Fires in the wet. Fires that took a house in the night with no lamp lit and no stove going. That things happened to people that the ones who told her could not explain, and did not want to try to, and would go quiet in the middle of trying, and change the subject the way the grown people at the supper tables had changed the subject when I was a child. That same smooth flinch. And that it spread. That was her word, the word everyone gave her, the only word that ever came back the same from every direction. It spread. Whatever had been held back at the head of the branch, held back for longer than anyone could account for, by a family that asked nothing and was given nothing but mockery. When the holding back stopped, it came down the branch and into the fold, and it spread, house to house, up both slopes, and it did not stop until there was nothing left in that town for it to spread to. I asked her, I could not help it, whether there was any one thing she knew, not the whole, just one detail, one true solid fact she could stand on. And she was quiet a moment, and then she told me the only thing she had that was a thing and not a rumor of a thing. And she told it to me the way you tell a thing you have decided to be rid of, and I am going to tell it to you the same way, and then we are both going to leave it alone. That is the one thing. We are leaving it alone now. She told me that, and then she let it go, and I watched her let it go, and I understood the thing I told you about earlier, that there was relief in her under the fear, an old relief at having finally a person to hand it to. Because here is the worst of it, the reason there are no details, the reason two old women in a waiting room had between them only fragments of the end of the place that made them. The people who would have known what happened to that town were in the town. Every soul who could have stood outside it and kept the account was inside it when it went. You cannot bring back a clear report from inside a thing that takes everyone. The story has no narrator, because the thing that came down the branch ate the narrators along with the rest. I should tell you how she told it to me, because the how of it has stayed with me as much as the what. We were in that room with the chairs that do not face each other, and the clock that was wrong, and the light that hummed, and around us people were waiting on their own news. And Ruth told me the end of our town in a low, even voice, almost without weight, the way you would tell a person the train times. I have thought since that she had told it to herself so many times, alone, over so many years, that all the horror had been worn smooth off the words, and what was left was just the shape of them, like a stone carried a long time in a pocket. She did not look at me while she told it. She looked at my hand, which she was still holding, and turned it a little this way and that. And I watched her face do the thing I had watched the grown people's faces do at the supper tables when I was a child. Go careful, go smooth, flinch just slightly, and then settle. And I understood that the flinch had never left her, that she had carried the whole arrangement of that town inside her all her life, the careful talk and the not looking up the branch, the same as I had, only she had spent her years walking toward the thing, and I had spent mine walking away from it. And here at the end, the two of us had come round to the same small room, and the same few worn fragments, and the same hole in the middle that neither of our lives had been long enough to fill. And then a voice called out one of our names in that low room, and the spell of it broke, and we were just two old women again, saying the small things. She squeezed my hand. She said she was glad it was me. I have never been sure what she meant by that. Glad it was me she had found. Glad it was me she could finally tell. Glad it was me and not her who had been spared the years of trying to learn the rest. I did not ask. We parted. I never saw her again. I will not give you the name. I have my reasons, and they are the same as the family's reasons for never being written down, which is that some things are kept safest by being kept off the page. But I knew it. After all those years of not letting myself remember it, I knew it the instant I saw it, and my hands turned the wheel before any part of me that thinks had a say in the matter. The body again. The body knew the way down into the fold, and it took me there. The one road in was still the one road in. That has stayed with me, that after everything, the road was just a road. Asphalt gone to gravel, gone to dirt, dropping down off the ridge into the crease of the land, exactly the way it had when I was 8 in the back of my father's truck, going the other direction. I went down it slow. I had all the time in the world, and no wish to use any of it. And so I crawled down into that crease at the pace of a thing that does not want to arrive. There is a quiet that I have no good word for, and I have looked for the word for a long time, because I would like to be able to hand it to you cleanly, and I cannot. It is not the quiet of a place where no one lives. I have been in plenty of empty places, ghost towns and abandoned farms and houses with the roofs fallen in. And an empty place is never truly quiet. It hums low underneath. Wind finding the gaps in things, a loose board working, a bird, the small busy life that moves into anywhere people move out of. An empty place is loud with the world taking it back. This was not that. This was the quiet of a place the life had been pulled out of and not given back. The houses were standing, some of them, gray, slumped, but standing. The church was standing, with its short steeple. You could see the flat where the store had been, and the porch posts of it, leaning. And there was not one living thing the whole way down and through what had been the middle of it. Not a bird, not a dog, not an insect in the long grass. And the grass was long, but it was not moving. And there should have been a wind down in that crease in the late afternoon. There is always a wind down in those folds when the day starts to cool, and there was none. The grass stood up straight and dead still in air that should have stirred it, and nothing flew, and nothing called, and the only sound in all that hollow was the sound of my own car, which I had stopped, and my own breathing, which I found I was keeping shallow, the way you breathe in a sick room, the way that whole town had taught its children to breathe. It had been drained. That is the only word I have ever found that fit, and it is not a good word, but it is the true one. Something had come into that place and drained it, as you drain a thing you do not mean to fill again, and what was left was the shape of a town with all the town poured out of it. I sat there a long while, and then I made myself look where I had spent a whole childhood and a whole drive learning not to look. I looked down to where the houses gave out and the creek came down, and I looked at the woods. They had come down. I do not know how else to say it, and I do not expect you to believe it, and I am not entirely sure I believe it myself, except that I saw it, with these eyes, in the plain light of a late afternoon. The tree line was not where it had been. The woods that had stood down at the head of the branch, behind the last of the houses, they had come down the fold. They stood now among the houses, around them, over them,
the laurel grown up through the porches and the old dark trees standing in what had been yards. And the whole lower half of that town was not a town anymore, but a woods with houses in it, going dark, entangled, and cold, and the cold of it reached up the fold toward where I sat exactly the way it had reached out across the low ground when I was a girl, poured and waiting. And the track still went up the branch. I could see the foot of it, where a car might once have been found, pointed the wrong way with its door open. It went up into the dark of the come-down woods, and I could not see where it went after that, and I did not want to. I did not get out of the car. I did not drive down to the foot of the track. I sat there at the lip of that drained fold, with the cold coming up toward me, and the dead grass standing still in the windless air, and I looked at the woods that had walked down out of the high country into a town that had no one left to keep them off. And then I put the car in gear, and I backed it around, and I drove up the one road out, up over the ridge, and I felt, I will tell you the truth, I felt the same loosening in my chest coming up over that ridge that I had felt at 8 years old. The held thing letting go. And this time I knew exactly what it was, and I was not glad. I was much too late now to be glad. I just breathed, the way you breathe when you have gotten out of a place a second time, and you know now the price of the ticket. I have thought a long time about why it was Ruth and me, why the two of us are the ones left at the far ends of our lives to hold the fragments of that place between us, when there were so many others, whole families, generations, people who had been there since before anyone, who are not left to hold anything at all. And the answer I have come to does not flatter us, and I have decided you should have it anyway, because it is the thing this whole long story has been walking toward, and I will not cheat you of it now. We were not spared because we were good. We were not spared because we saw clearly, or chose well, or did any single thing right. We were spared because we did not belong there. Two families that came and went, that put down nothing they could not carry, that were gone up over the ridge before the tying ever stopped. We were saved by our rootlessness, which is to say, we were saved by accident, which is to say, we were saved by nothing in ourselves at all. And the people who belonged, the ones with houses their grandfathers had raised, the ones with people in the ground there, the ones who could not imagine leaving, because leaving is unimaginable to a person who is truly from somewhere, they are the ones it took. In that fold, in the end, belonging was the thing that killed you. The deeper your roots went, the surer it had you. And the only ones who walked out were the ones who had never let themselves love the place enough to stay. I have carried that a long time, and it does not get lighter. And the family, the strange family at the head of the branch, the ones we were taught to shun and steer wide of and never bother, the ones the whole town spent longer than anyone could rightly count, holding at arm's length and laughing at in the daylight and dreading in the dark. I think you have understood by now what the town understood only when it was far too late to be of any use to them. They were not the bad thing in those woods. They were what stood between the town and it. Every spring they went up into the cold, and they tied. The windings wound one more turn thicker. A fresh, pale stone carried up from far-off water and set on top. The gray things renewed on their cords at the height of a man's chest. And as long as they tied, The thing at the head of the branch stayed at the head of the branch, and the town got to go on holding its breath and making its own daylight and pretending, the way the living must pretend, that it was safe. That family was the fence. It had always been the fence. And a whole town spent generation upon generation mocking the only thing standing between it and the dark. And then the fence grew old, and the fence died, with no one to so much as write its name down, and the dark came through. But it is Ruth's grandmother I think of. It is always her in the end. She gave us the rule 100 times, and never once the reason. She sat in her chair on that porch and watched the bottom of the fold all day, with the patience of a person watching a thing that has to be watched. She came down a dark slope without a sound, on old legs that could barely cross a room, and she closed her hand on my shoulder and turned me away from the tree line and walked me home. And the only thing she ever told me of what she knew was 4 words, low, almost to herself. It is worst in the evening. She was warning us. She was always, that whole year, in everything she did, warning the 2 of us. And she was one of the ones with roots. She was one of the ones who belonged. She stayed. And the dark that came down the branch took her along with everyone else who stayed, which means that the woman who kept me out of those trees is in the ground that it all came up out of, and there is no stone there for her either, and no one left to put one. So if I have carried anything out of that fold, out of the cold at the bottom of it, out of Ruth's question in the humming room, out of a drained town with the woods walked down into it, it is not a warning about the woods. You will likely never stand at the foot of a branch like that one, and if you do, you will not need me to tell you to turn around. What I carried out is smaller than that, and harder, and I am going to give it to you now and then let you go to sleep.